My name is David Cohen, class of 1983. I'm excited to help facilitate these conversations and create a platform for these artists to share their stories. My experience at PNCA had a profound influence on my life and my career pathway, as it has for many of you in the audience as well. As we listen to the artists participating in this series, I'm hoping we can get a glimpse into the diversity of expressions and directions that each person's PNCA experience has helped provoke. We lined up 25 alumni to speak over these 5 weeks, so we're hoping you can tune into next week's session as well. I believe the same link should get you into each Zoom session. And now the panel. Today we have with us 4 alumni. First, Jonah Grenabor from class of 2005, Cecilia Minion Hamlin from class of 2014, Victoria Moran, class of 2016, and Amy Sitars, class of 2017. As a way of introducing yourselves, let's start off with a short story about how you ended up here today. What we'd like to hear you share very briefly is sort of the broad arc of your journey as a creative. Why don't we start with Jonah? Why don't you get us going?
Thank you. Yeah, so I ended up here. I started my art education in Vancouver, BC at Simon Fraser University. And in 2000, I moved to Portland for love. And I worked for a while. I left school and I just worked in Portland for a while. And then I wanted to come back to school. And my friend, now it's proven to be a lifelong friend, was a PNCA student at the time, and he said, you should, if you want to go to art school, you should come to the PNCA. And I applied and I went, and then in 2005, when I graduated, I moved to New York to get my MFA, and then have stayed here more or less since. And since that time, some highlights have been showing at David Zwirner, MoMA, Art in General, the Queen's Museum, the Bard Hessel Museum of Art, MoMA PS1, and the Contemporary Art Museum in Houston. And I participated in residencies like Oxbow, the Fire Island Residency, and Recess. And then I've received travel and project grants from Canada Council for the Arts. So I just continue to make work and work and teach and yeah, and PNCA was very important to me too. Like I said, many of my still family really is also, I went to school with there. So it was a really valuable experience for me.
Great, great, thanks for sharing. Cecilia, why don't you go next?
Okay. Hi, I'm Cecilia, and my practice is kind of like a blend of photography and printmaking that started when I was pretty young. I think the time that most kids pick up a crayon was about the time I picked up a camera. I've always really enjoyed the language of photography, and by the time I found my way to PNCA, it was through luck that I took a photo class. I wasn't very interested in art education, but I had a hard time finding my way at state school, so I kind of went on a whim, and it worked out really beautifully. It took about like a semester before all of my teachers were asking if I had, if I had any idea what printmaking was or if I had tried it. So pretty early, I kind of started looking into what printmaking was, and my gateway drug was kind of alt photo with Kate Copeland and Abra Ancliffe. I took it twice. And it expanded my ability to use photography, and instead of taking images, I was really interested in making making images, and that meant finding a process that had meaning behind it. I wasn't finding a lot of that in the darkroom or in Photoshop. So yeah, so through PNCA, I was able to find like photo lithography and transfer and cyanotype, all processes that I still use today. And yeah, following that, you know, you leave school and you don't have studio access anymore. So finding a work-life balance um, has been really wonderful the last couple of years. I live in Oakland now with my husband, who I met at like a SGC, which is like the printmaking conference. Um, and so we have like an at-home studio and printmaking press, and yeah, we're kind of cruising right now. So hoping to learn more and grow more. So, so thank you.
Great, thanks for sharing. Victoria, why don't you go next?
Great, that sounds good. So I ended up at PNCA because I was looking for a low residency program. And for me, that meant I had limited options. But what was so great is PNCA was such a good fit for me. I loved Portland. I loved that because I live in Eugene. I could go home once or twice during the summer term because with the low residency, you are there for 3 summers, and then during the academic year, you're in your own home and in your own studio. So I left the University of Oregon as a financial aid counselor to pursue my dream of getting my master's degree. And that really was because my mother had passed away and my daughter was grown. And I thought, you know, life is long and life is short. So what do you want to do in this next round? So I went ahead and I went and received my master's degree, and it really changed how I saw myself, and it really changed how I understood what a studio practice is. So when I finished up in 2016 and came back to Eugene, I knew I didn't want to go back to financial aid. I knew I didn't want to work 40 hours a week. So for a while, I mill placed just kind of put together things to make be financially okay. And it was going along really, really well. I had lots of art gigs, as they are called, until COVID hit. And when COVID hit, a bunch of my teaching was canceled, workshops were canceled, everything was canceled. And so I said, well, I still have student loans to pay back. So I actually have a job now at Sacred Heart at Riverbend. It's a hospital through Peace Health. And I work here 3 days a week. So for 3 days, I'm at work. And then for 3 days, I'm in the studio. And I do have an at-home studio, which has its own challenges. But I think 3 days here are worth it because then I get my 3 days of studio time. And I have a show at Coos Art Museum this December, and hopefully COVID will not disrupt that, but we'll wait and see.
Oh, great, thanks for sharing. Amy, why don't you tell your story?
Thank you. I graduated from PNC in 2017 with a BFA in photography, and I got here by growing up in a really small town of like 250 people in mid-eastern Oregon. My grandmother was an art teacher at the local high school there, and she had never had any art training, but they needed an art teacher and just were like, hey, you know, do you want to teach art? And so I was around art a lot growing up, and I really loved taking photos, and I would steal my grandfather's photo or camera often. And, you know, like when I was 8 or 9, and he would get the film back and there would be photos, you know, that he hadn't taken. And so I've been taking photos for a long time. I didn't get to PNCA until I was about 39. I think I was like the second oldest person there. I had moved to Portland in 93. I waited tables for like 20 years, got fired from every job. So finally got fired in 2012, I believe it was. And I decided to go back to school, and I ended up at Mount Hood in their photography program. And it was very technical, and I really dreaded being a commercial photographer. And a friend there said, you should apply to PNCA. And I had no idea what PNCA was. So I did. And when I got there, I had found my people. Like, I was so happy, and just continued to pursue photography. I I did a lot of experimentation with photography and moved into alt photo. And then after graduating, I started watching the news about like children being separated from their families at the border. And I began this project called the Bronze Shoes Installation Project, where I would gather children's shoes and bronze them and hang them all over town, out of state, at the border. And since then, I have just continued to make work that challenges the status quo and that asks for people to look at our government, its racist policies, and bring those things to people's attention and hopefully spark change in the way that people think, so that that will bring bigger change in the future.
Thanks so much for sharing. So the next question is really about kind of the content, where the work comes from, where the images come from. I'm very interested in the notion of curiosity and how curiosity is the thing that sort of drives a lot of us. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your curiosity. I think it is, again, what makes us unique as artists. We each have our own sort of sense of curiosity. So why don't you share a little bit about what are you curious about? What's your curiosity button, so to speak? What inspires you to do your work? Amy, why don't we start with you?
Okay. I love experimentation. I love taking a method of making and breaking all of the rules and then seeing what will happen. Being rebellious, not doing things, the way you're supposed to or the way that everyone does it. And I think that creativity in itself challenges what is normal. And I like to use art as a form of direct action. So I'm constantly thinking about how I can present words or ideas in public spaces that will make people see their own place in this like movement for justice. And I think that people often become desensitized to traditional forms of protests, such as marches, kind of rallies. They just kind of look away and they're like, those hoodlums, or gosh, they do this all the time. And so I think that art needs to be kind of at the forefront of our struggle for justice and greater democracy. And I think it has a way of making people sit with its message longer, and just make them think it through and perhaps see their own place in it. And so my constant curiosity is, how can I best creatively show what is happening around us and make that message sit with people, and so inspire them to think more deeply about what's going on around them.
Great story. Cecilia, why don't you talk about curiosity?
Sure. Yeah. So for me, I guess like my practice in curiosity really began like behind a camera lens and kind of like a practice in solitude and kind of finding like closeness in nature usually, but also like architecture and I love like the poetics of space. That was one of the best reads at PNCA. Kind of like the micro universes that are all around us, and that kind of branches into kind of using the content that I'm like really drawn to and the type of photographs that I make, and then kind of playing with the ideas of time and layering and iteration. I'm obviously very like, printmaking is probably my biggest curiosity, that kind of ability to change and shift narrative inside of one image by moving things and changing colors and removing information and revealing information. And I think of it as kind of like a play with solitude and softness and finding space to play with time and linear time. there was a word for linearness. And I'm just really interested in playing with those things. I've been drawn a little bit more towards portraiture. I've played with it like on and off a bit, but now with being alone all the time, I've been finding a little bit more connection in taking self-portraiture and kind of placing images of self in these images that tend to lack people that I've always had. So yeah, I'd say those are where I'm at. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Jonah, why don't you share a little bit about things that inspire you?
Thank you. Yeah, I guess what inspires me or what I like, or it seems like over the years I've made work about. I mean, I think that the work can often tell you what you're curious about before you really know. And the thing that I see is a curiosity and a way of scrutinizing the act of looking and observation. So I was an interdisciplinary major, and I took classes with Emily Ginsberg and Linda Cleaver, and they were both very formative on my thinking and approach to art making, which was really, really conceptual based, and then choosing the best form to express that in. And what I've done over the years is just become really involved in abstraction as a way to address the politics of representation. So looking at and using spare materials, so that when you're looking at a sculpture or an installation, you really have to look and pay attention to your looking and also your position, because as you walk around or move, the piece moves, and well, it appears to move, your viewpoint shifts. And so often a kind of opposite or different angle will be shown through that process. So, and the time for me, time has also been incorporated into that in a way where like some of my sculptures respond to light conditions. So if you watched it for 24 hours, it goes through night and we lose our daytime vision and ability to see color. You start to see in black and white under like moonlight. You see a painting that really, really shifts over that. So something that appears to be opposite will become the same. And really that way of breaking down binaries, binary understanding or thinking through time and light. And now I've kind of taken that thinking and brought it to thinking about representational forms of photography and video, and the way that that those have abstraction built into them, the way that symbols abstract, or the idea of representation abstracts from a total being, person or system. So I guess ideas excite me and make me curious. But that translation into form is so vital and important.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing. Victoria, why don't you talk a little bit about curiosity?
Sure. Well, so I'm really curious about the human body. And this curiosity probably started when I was 2, because my mother has a couple of photos of me. She's taken me to the store to buy a baby doll. I have this huge fit. I want these really rigid Barbie-esque dolls. They're not quite Barbie. They're too generic and too cheap to be Barbie, and they're rigid. And there's a man, and there's a woman, and I'm fascinated. And they're naked, and I'm really fascinated with these naked dolls. Well, that's never really left me. I'm still fascinated with the human body. I'm fascinated with how different types of bodies look. I remember someone asking me one time when I was waiting tables years ago, the man said, "Oh, who's that beautiful girl over there?" And I look around, I'm like, "What beautiful girl?" And I'm like, "What beautiful girl?" And he points her out. And she is beautiful, but she was so nasty on the inside, I didn't know who he was talking about. So I'm always trying to grapple with this idea of what's on the inside and what's on the outside and kind of abstracting. And most of the time I use my own body as a stand-in, because I think folks get their feelings hurt if you abstract their body. Before COVID, every Saturday I met with friends at Lane Community College, and we hire a model and they pose for 3 hours, one pose for 3 hours for 5 weeks at a time. So I get a lot of practice there, but in my studio, I get to play and I get to manipulate, and I get to use my own body to kind of focus on these ideas that I see, on the ideas of beauty, on aging, on loss, on reconciliation, on hope, and everything else. And if Faith wants to share my triptych right now, that would be super awesome, because one of the triptych in the middle, Discouraged, she's part of the show. These are 3 feet by 7.5 feet, so 36 inch, 6.5 feet, so 36 by 80 inch. These are mixed media, pencil and gesso and a little charcoal. And so these represent the 3 graces, if you will. These were placed in a gallery in February, just as COVID was hitting. And what I really loved about this work is I did research on the gallery. So the gallery used to be a church built in the early 1920s. The church was dismantled in the 1950s. So the sense of loss was really great for me. Like, where'd all these people go? And then it became a gallery. And the gallerist, Maud Kearns, is a woman, and she started the gallery. So I really wanted to bring in all of this research and respect, but also this kind of loss as well, and this disconnection as well. So yeah, so the human body, I'm really fascinated, and I try to have a good time in the studio. So sometimes things look a little funky, but I think they turn out pretty fun.
Thank you. It's great to hear everybody's story, everything from very formal concerns to very personal concerns, to also internal vision of, or looking inside of us, to looking out into the community to be inspired by things that are going on in our culture. We mix these things together all the time in all of our work, I think, in different degrees, but great to get the range from all of you. The next question I want to ask is really about kind of bumps along the way, or things learned along the way, or even opportunities. So on the positive side, as you've kind of moved through your career, and some of you are new, not out of school for that long, but things that have kind of affected your trajectory in different ways. And so I would love to hear about that. Actually, Victoria, why don't you start with that one?
Sure. So for me, the positive thing is I was a little bit older when I went to graduate school. I was in the low res program, so I wasn't, it wasn't odd. It wasn't like I didn't fit in. And I met some great folks, and I learned a lot. But what I really learned was, well, you got to do something. This mentor said, you got to do something. And I was like, right, she's right. I can either put 100% into grad school or not. And I can either do my best and, try to get better and make art or not. It's really up to me. And that was really empowering to be like, this is all up to me. And so another mentor had said something about, for a long time, I just said yes to everything, And so I say yes to everything. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's a bad thing. For me, it's been a good thing because it has led to bigger shows. So now I'm dropping work off. I don't have to hang it myself. They do the, publicity, and that's nice. You want to get to that point. So there is something about that. But I will say, when COVID hit and they said, okay, everybody go home, I thought, this is fantastic. This is what I have been made for. Like, this girl can be in the studio all day long, And I'm going to tell you something. It hit me hard. Not only did all my gig work go away and I had to go find an office job 3 days a week, but also my networking kind of fell apart, not going and seeing my art friends on Saturdays to draw naked people. So all of these things that were filling me up were gone, and all I had was time. And I realized, I think I've been lying to myself saying, I need more time. I don't think I need more time. I need things to fill me up. I need things to keep me motivated. I need to have my priorities straight. So I think all the obstacles that I thought I had, I really didn't have. So this made me rethink my studio practice, made me rethink what charges me up, what gets me going in the morning. So yeah, it's been really kind of a huge learning experience for me personally.
Great, thanks for sharing. Jonah, why don't you go next? Challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so many challenges, I feel, and opportunities. I think, you know, I do think that time and money are really the biggest challenges that artists face in general. Because, and that can be that's an opportunity too, right? Like residencies or grants are an amazing opportunity to have time and the support you need to make your work. I think, you know, there's like a lot of challenges that are just so much internal challenges where you really are like looking at yourself as your biggest obstacle. But there's opportunity there too. Like I think, you know, my interest in visibility makes and making work that questions that makes my work really difficult to document. And that's been that's just like a challenge of my career. But I also, it's important to me. Like it made me realize that the commitment to making work that was hard to see was a kind of core element of the practice. And contingency happened in that way too. Like I was making these installations that were attached to the wall, and I decided I wanted to make something that I didn't have to go and personally install. Like I wanted something that I could, a sculpture that I could send somewhere. And I made these like light drawings with mirrors and prisms. And it was at the opening of a show, and this is also a time period where people were like, oh, you never use color in your work. And so the prisms were a way to use color without, by bringing it in materially. And I'd set it up, and a friend was like, oh, it's so bleak. And I was like, what? And I was like, no, but there's color. And they were like, no, there's not. So we went over, and somebody had bumped the pedestal just enough that this light source, because, you know, a prism has to be like on a slit of light to make the spectrum visible. And so it had just shifted, not enough to knock any of the prisms over, but just enough so that that light, it wasn't sitting right on that edge of the shadow anymore. And the light was gone. The work was gone, essentially. And that is when I realized that even if I was trying to make something that wasn't dependent on relationships and interdependent work with interdependent relationships, that it was just going to get in there in the side anyway. And that's when I learned that contingency was a really important aspect of my work. So there's like, you know, bigger challenges, broader challenges, like general challenges, and then I think just like the specific challenges that let you like learn about what's important to you.
Jonah, thank you. Amy, why don't you go next? Opportunities and challenges.
Sure, thank you. I will definitely have to say that some challenge, or, you know, oftentimes a lack of resources is a challenge. Definitely once graduating, you know, the darkroom was no longer available, or like printing big, or, you know, printing wasn't, you know, available, or screen printing. So that was a big thing after I graduated. But right now it's actually like teaching myself how to use materials that I've never used before, and how to put things together in a sort of cohesive way. And like, how can I create something without spending money on useless materials, you know, because there's so many false starts. And if you know, don't really know what material you should use or what will work best. Like, I mean, I bought rolls of chicken wire, and you know, it always comes in handy later, but you know, sometimes at the moment it's like sort of crushing if you can't get what you need. Um, though I do a lot of research, which is really, really fun. And I've met people in the community who are also artists and make art for protests. And a really valuable thing is some photographers that I've met who document my work, because a lot of it is sort of guerrilla style, or installations that then, you know, are removed pretty quickly, or kind of some ephemeral type work that, you know, moves into the community in some way. And so that has been a real blessing to have friends be able to document the work so that I can actually, you know, show it. And with COVID, that is especially helpful, because a lot of ways that we are able to present our work is online. And so that those digital images are incredibly important. I think that it is super dreamy for me right now to be able to just make art every second of the day if I want to. But it's also stressful. And sometimes, you know, that stress kind of eats up the energy that I have for making. But it's just really, really wonderful to have a close community of artists who, you know, we help each other, you know, keep our spirits up, continue making, sharing resources. So that's definitely a cool thing.
Great, thanks for sharing. Cecilia, why don't you talk a little bit about challenges and opportunities?
Oh, there we go. Yeah, it's really actually kind of like helpful to hear everybody talking about gosh, such universal struggles as an artist, like time and resources, and kind of like a career balance. I'd say that resonated really strongly with me. In printmaking, I've had a lot of opportunities that kind of became challenges. I was very lucky to work at Gamblin in Portland before moving to Oakland, and I developed an ink with them, and went to many conferences and amazing opportunities. But it sort of began this like challenge for me, where after I moved, I worked in a professional print studio, and then did card printing, and I wasn't able to like mesh the opportunities of career and meeting notable artists with my actual making process. And I thought maybe it was time, but I think there's a certain level of drainage that can happen when you're hyper focusing your money earning capacity in the arena where you really want to be making. And I've found that kind of leaving that behind, and having more of like I work mostly in plant care and florals now, which some people think does really marry well with my work. I have a lot of natural photography and so on, but kind of letting go of ego in that way, and letting go of kind of being like a professional printer and having that kind of stamp was really hindering my ability to create space for myself and work, and also collaborate. I've had way more collaborations with poets and artists who want to write poetry, and making zines and meeting up, and that's been a huge blessing from being able to like tell myself like it's okay to just work for myself and take care of myself and my family, and so yeah.
Cool, thank you. I'm going to veer off script for a second, because Victoria and Amy brought up COVID, and the pandemic has thrown everybody's life into directions none of us predicted or impacted us in any ways. I wonder if anyone else wants to, or you want to elaborate at all on anything related to how maybe COVID affected your life as an artist. Any thoughts? Who would like to, anyone want to go?
I'll say something.
Jonah?
Yeah. So I found, I mean, for me, COVID has just recently been a time where I could actually make. I saw I saw a lot of different artists have a real variety of responses. And I should say too that I haven't lost my employment. And so my time isn't actually, my time in the studio is the same. But the stress of it did make it hard for me to work at first. But then I saw other people that were just like immediately making as a way of coping with it. So I think that there's just, you know, so many ways of dealing, so many ways that we deal with extreme circumstances. And as I wasn't really able to make, I also didn't sweat it too much. I was like, you know, I'm doing what I can and that's okay. And I feel like it's important for, people to accept their responses, because that it's the only thing we can do, you know, is just accept however it's affecting us. Thank you.
Great. Anyway, anyone else want to share?
I feel like it has, you know, made us think differently about the work that we're making and how to present it, and be really creative in how we're able to get it out into the world. And so, you know, I've done things that, you know, I'd never did before, like projection was something that was really safe to do, you know, with like only 2 people are needed. And I just think it is really cool that we've had to kind of navigate this pandemic creatively, and to continue to get our work out there in, you know, new ways that we would have never, you know, experienced before. And I think in a way that kind of saves me, you know, it has saved me in the middle of all of this. And I guess that's probably it.
Okay, great. Cecilia, Victoria, anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I think for me, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Please go ahead.
I think for me, like I said, when I said COVID hit and I thought, oh, this is gonna be great, I'm gonna get in the studio. And I think what really it led me to do is to realize I needed help. That I wasn't maybe responding. So I had a response to it, but it wasn't a response that I wanted. It was making me not get in the studio. So COVID was really kind of a sad time for me. Plus my husband had just had 2 surgeries. He was supposed to lose his job. So there was a lot with that. And so I went and found a counselor. I went and found a therapist to talk to. And I think me admitting out loud to someone, hey, I'm struggling being an artist right now and I don't know how to move forward. That the next day I was in the studio for 8 hours. So I think for me, it was just about being honest. I just feel so fortunate to be an artist. I couldn't believe I was struggling. So I couldn't kind of deal with it. So I think being okay and saying, hey, I need help. I think we have to be honest sometimes with ourselves and others. And that's what really changed for me. Yeah.
Thanks, Victoria. Cecilia?
Yeah, all of these are really like beautiful like thoughts on what's going on right now. I found the easier part for me has been making space to not create and to process. I lost 2 jobs in a row. There's been tons of fires in California, so I was like pretty much sick for like a month and a half, like kind of immobilized and all that. I mean, everything going on right now is quite impactful. And so practicing making space for myself has been wonderful. But what has been quite hard for me is the reaching out and the connecting. Amy's words are really beautiful, and I really appreciate the idea of finding collaboration during a pandemic. This opportunity today is probably the closest I've been to having like a formal chat with artists. I've had a couple of video like kind of critiques with some friends, but yeah, I found it really hard. Instagram is like kind of our only resource sometimes, and it's exhausting, and I miss just vibing.
Great. Thank you all for sharing. Beautiful stories. My last kind of formal question is really around PNCA and your experience there. Wondering if you could share something that came out of that experience that you still hold close to you right now, or that's impacted you, changed you, affected you in some way. Uh, Cecilia, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, it sort of dovetails on what I was just talking about, that the kind of like critique environment in school was like semi-dreaded, but just learning how to talk and be productive, and understanding like how to be positive and be informed while talking about others' work and your own work is something that I have no idea if I ever would have found that anywhere else. So those critiques were so important. The conversations in almost classes were, I still remember most of them, and I think about a lot of them. But I think just based on the trajectory of my way of making, I think probably the most important was the alt photo class, both Kate Copeland's and Aubrey Ancliffe's. There was like a lot of magic in there. So yeah, kind of both physical and conversational.
Great, thanks. Amy, why don't you go next?
Sure. I think probably the biggest thing that I came away with is the idea of conceptualism, conceptual art, because I fought that the entire time I was there. It's like, why does it have to mean something? Like, why can't you just make something that's pretty, or that as is, it just, has a composition. And so by the end of it, I had just really, really learned what conceptual art was, and how to know that every step in the process is important, and every act of making and your intentions are important, and sometimes that process is even more important than the actual thing itself. So I am always thinking about things in that manner now, like, how is this informing the work, or how is this why is this choice making it say something or not say something, and I really love learning that a lot. And the same as Cecilia said, the critique was dreadful but amazing to learn how to talk about work, how to talk about others' work, and how to talk about your own work, that I had, no clue of at all. So that's it.
Thanks. Victoria, why don't you go next?
Sure. So for me, what PNCA really brought was similar to what Amy said. So bringing intentional ideas and concepts and theories and your own revelations to your work. I have a BFA in painting from the U of O. It was very formal. I took a 17-year break between the two to raise a human. So I think for me, it was about moving forward and understanding how I was going to move forward. I could have, started painting and, trying to get into shows. I just don't think I knew how to do that. I don't think I got that training as an undergrad. And so I was really more about, how do I move forward for myself? What does success for me look like? Because it's not going to look like success for everyone. And also, I met some awesome people. And I'm going to tell you, that has just been, I still think about them. I still talk to some of them. So I think it's the people and the moving forward for me that made PNCA such a success in my life.
Great, thanks for sharing. Jonah, why don't you talk about how PNCA impacted you?
Yeah, it has a huge impact on me. I think often when I think of my time in Portland, which was about 5 years, I had this memory of biking over the bridges to go to classes, and knowing that I would remember this as a really happy time in my life. Like, I had that sense when I was there. which, you know, you don't always know. Sometimes happy moments in your life, you're just like, oh, this is great, but you don't know. You're not conscious that it's going to sit with you. And I did know it then. And I think definitely a big part of that was community, because the way that PNCA, it's a very loving atmosphere, right? It's very nurturing, very challenging, but also very loving and supportive. And I feel like there was space for everyone to just be who they were and to make what they needed to make and think about what they needed to think about, and really respectful dialogue. So I think I learned, I mean, aside from, there's definitely, I echo the critique as a formative thing too, like the ability to discern and articulate what you're seeing, both in your own work and in other people's, was very powerful. But I think because of that community and that supportive, nurturing quality that I think is particular to PNCA, or the feeling that I'm talking about, I feel like is unique to PNCA. I also really learned to bring my whole self into that experience. So it wasn't just conceptual or visual, it was also I felt other people's work and my own work. And I think I brought that with me into the way that I make like my felt experience, a phenomenological experience is very important to the way I encounter art now. So I would say that. Thanks.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think what I've heard from so many artists is this sense of community. Being an artist, being a creative can be incredibly isolating. And to be 4 years, 2 years, however many years we're there, to be in this community, to have connection, to be able to bounce your voice off other people's voices, listen to other people's voices, how they talk about their work, all that, I think is always seems to be powerful and lasting. So thank you all for sharing. You know, I don't really have any more formal questions right now, but we've got an open platform. I'm wondering if anyone wants to share anything in our last few minutes that we're together. Anybody have anything they'd like to share? Final thoughts?
If you're in Coos Bay, December 11th, and COVID, you know, we don't have any restrictions, come see my work at the Coos Art Museum. Got to plug everything, you know what I mean?
Promotion is fine. We can promote, that's okay. Anybody else? Any last kind of final thoughts that you'd like to share? Okay, maybe we're done. We got done a few minutes early. Well, thank you all. I want to thank all the artists, thank the audience for being there, but also thank the artists for their time today, their willingness to share their ideas and stories with all of us. It's very courageous of all of you to do this. I hope everybody gets a chance to sit in on next Friday's panel session as well. It'll be the last one of our series of 5. And we would love it if you can help get the word out, pass it on to friends. We'd love to have more people in the audience to listen in. I think these are really worthwhile, impactful conversations. And again, please check out the show, Unlimited 2020 webpage to view the entire exhibition. Hopefully next year, 2021, we'll be in a place where we can actually have real art in a real space and be together in physical time and space to build community amongst ourselves. So I hope we can celebrate that way next year. And lastly, do remember the Laura Russo Distinguished Alumni Award nominations, December 7th deadline. Please nominate someone, go to the website, find the link and do nominate someone. It would be really helpful. I know there's so many great people out there that are deserving. So again, thanks for being here, making this a meaningful event for our panelists, for the school, and actually for the broader art community as well. I hope to see many of you next week. So thank you all. Thank you, artists.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing us together.
Yeah,
Sure.
thank you.